Absolutely fantastic. Wonderful. Throw some ones in the chat for Kevin Reylek. How incredible was that? Right? Show him love. Show him love. First lecture of our virtual event. Like clockwork. Like clockwork. So we're going to get Kevin actually in the room now for a live Q&A. So get your questions ready because I'm sure you got a lot of them and he's got all the answers. So if we can get Kevin to come into the room. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Lee. Hello, everybody.
Hey, man, thank you so much for putting that together. That was fascinating, educational, and awesome all in one. I'm sure you can see the ones flying in the chat room. So thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, appreciate that from you and from everybody. And it's great to see so many familiar names in the chat. Yeah, like I said, obviously it's a bummer to not all be together in Pittsburgh, but I'm so glad that we're doing this rather than just having the convention canceled. So,
yeah, man, we're here.
I'll always take the next best thing.
We might not be able to eat Primanti Brothers sandwiches together, but this is a pretty good second.
2 years. 2 years is not a long time to wait for a good sandwich.
You have to wait a little bit. That's okay, though. It's worth the wait. I promise. I promise. So, Kevin, you threw so much information at us, and the images, like I was watching the chat room. Daniel Wilson went crazy when you were showing some of those images. Jay McKinstry was going nuts. Like this was fantastic. So we're going to let people start asking questions in the chat. Give that a couple of seconds. And let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What was the most shocking thing that you found while putting together this project?
Oh, man. The most interesting thing for me that was a new piece of information were those bits that came to me from Steve 40 that Steve had found and that Bill Kalush had found about. Because for years, like for decades, that Cardano reference has been, to my knowledge, the earliest sort of write-up about marked cards. So the fact that we have something that goes back even earlier was fascinating, and that people were tuning into, those differences in paper in the mid 1600s was pretty crazy.
Absolutely. It seems like you spent so much time and energy and effort researching this. Like this was so well done, Kevin. So well done.
Thank you. I stand on the shoulders. Like I've done a lot of my own research, but obviously the Kirk Charles book that I mentioned, Marked for Life, and the Tom Ransom article, which you actually sent to me, Lee. I think that Kirk got a lot of his information for his book probably from Tom, if not from Tom's article, from Tom directly, because you do see some overlap in both of those. But, I like to read a reference and then go get the reference that they referenced to double check and see if there's more meat in there or whatnot. But yeah, it's such a deep topic, and, we didn't really talk at all about gambling mark decks, which is not an area where I'm an expert. So next year, maybe you can get Steve 40 on the lineup and he can talk about the gambling side of things. But yeah, it's just such a deep, fascinating thing. And there's so many articles and books and just so many more names that I couldn't mention due to time. But so, I wanted this to really be an overview and kind of give everyone a taste. And then if, hopefully you like to, learn more, then you can go rewatch the recording or send me a message and get some books and dive into it. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. You gave us more than a taste, my friend. You served us a nice lunch, right? Like,
all right.
This was really good. So let me get, we have some questions in the chat here. One from Kristen Patterson. It flew past me. She was asking about the bicycle deck. Just give me a second here. There we go. You showed a bicycle deck in box, identified it as marked. Is there an indicator to let everyone know that the cards are marked?
It depends on the deck. So there are several bicycle branded marked decks that are either riderback or nowadays maiden or mandolin. And it depends on the deck. So like that original one from 2005, the Boris Wild deck, I don't believe there were any special markings on the outside of the box. They did a paper wrap around the deck so that you knew it was special, but then once you took that off, everything looked normal. I don't recall off the top of my head what bonus cards or ad cards it came with. A lot of marked decks, even if they do look pretty standardly bicycle, might include like a little cheat sheet on how to read the marks. The one that we produced,
right? That helps.
Sure. The one that we produced at Penguin doesn't include that. We include a couple of gaffs, and otherwise it's a marked maiden deck. What we did with that one to distinguish, and this is a little touch. Some you can tell by the bottom flap. So we have our P3 logo on the bottom flap of our marked cards. But from the front, what we did there was change the color of the maiden back text under the spade. So usually on a red deck, that text would be in blue, and on a blue deck, that text would be in red. For our marked maidens, we changed just the color of that text as a really subtle kind of hint, so that you know, like, oh, that's one of my marked decks. But yeah, on that one, it depends on the creator, sort of how much identifying information there is on the outside.
Great. Okay, next question. Claudio Decourt, all the way from Brazil, wants to know, obviously, what do you think of the new Copig 310 marked decks?
I haven't handled them yet. I don't have them. The closest thing I have, these actually came in my mailbox today, like right before we did this. I have the new Ghost cohorts from Illusionist. And so this is the same marking system as the other cohorts. So yeah, that's the closest thing I have to any Copag marked decks currently. And they're great. I really love what Mundy's doing with their slim stock and everything.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I have to add some of those 310s to my collection. Yeah.
It seems like Mundy really knows what we want, right? Like they're really focused on making some really cool stuff. And so the whole 310 line from Copig is really fun to watch them kind of bring
go
ahead.
I saw on Instagram this morning. So we talked about edge marked cards, which are actually printed, you know, on the very edge of the back so that you can read it from a bevel. Go check out the Mundy Instagram, because now they're offering actual edge printing where they're printing on the cut edge of the deck. So like,
I saw that.
My mind immediately went to marked cards and the cool things that could be possible with that.
Of course it did. Who wants to play poker with this guy, right?
Nobody.
Okay, next question. What is your go-to marked deck when you perform? That's David Riley's asking.
I have three that I really like. First and foremost is usually the Penguin marked maidens. Partly I'm sure I'm biased because I helped co-design them. Also, they're just so affordable, but they're so innocent looking. I do mostly perform with bikes or, you know, a similar maiden or that sort of thing. And so it's just so familiar and they're so easy to read. So I like that a lot. I also really love the DMC Elites that I talked about in the talk, the ones from Phil Smith, because these marks are so big. Like I mentioned, they're about 10 millimeters tall. So even with my glasses, and I don't have great vision at all, I can read these from like 10 feet away, which is really nice. And kind of going back to those Al Baker thoughts on performance theory, if you can detach yourself from the deck when you're performing. So I love to hand the deck out, let people shuffle, let them sort of take the card out, look at it, put it back, and reshuffle. So they've done that whole shuffle and selection process while I'm standing several feet away. And that just, you know, it adds this extra layer of impossibility where, you know, most people, if they have seen a marked deck, they got a magic kit as a kid to add something tiny and impossible to read. So if you're standing 3 to 6 feet away from people, or especially now with social distancing, you gotta stand really far away.
Right.
And so I could still read a
you
big
need bigger
mark like
readers
that.
for social distancing.
Yeah, exactly. And then my other favorite are Tally-Ho circlebacks, which don't come marked by default from the factory, but I came up with my own reader system for these a few years back. And so I'll use these a lot, especially if I'm performing for magicians, because, you know, magicians are in the know. They know what trick decks have come out. So if I'm using something like those DMC Elites for magicians, they know, oh, that's a marked deck. Whereas most magicians, until right now, I guess, they don't know that circlebacks are marked. And so that's a good method to cancel out to help fool magicians. So those would be my three favorites that I use all the time.
Great. Okay, next question. This is a really good question. It's from Jasmine, and she wants to know have you ever come across any marked cards or fortune-telling decks?
Any marked fortune-telling decks? I personally haven't. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there must be marked tarot decks and that sort of thing. That's never been sort of my type of performance style or whatnot, so it's never anything that I've really dived into. But I would think that there has to be. There's no way that over all the years of tarot decks and fortune-telling decks being printed that nobody has marked one. I would think that would be impossible.
Plausible, definitely plausible. Great question, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. First off, I'm seeing a lot in the chat room that people want to vote Steve Forty for president. So I think that's hilarious.
Not
For those of you who
necessarily
don't know who Steve
president of the
40
club, just president of anything.
President of anything. Right. He can have the club. That's the curse, right? Is if you want to be president, you have to take the curse. Yeah, 40 is incredible. If you don't know who Steve Forty is, he's a gambling expert, historian. He had an amazing collection that was sold off, I think, about 10 or 11 years ago. So I'm sure if you bought some of it from that auction, you would have bought some of his stuff. Incredible. You can Google him. He's incredible. And it would be amazing if we could have him next year. It'd be amazing. But he might be busy because he is president of everything. So, okay. So let's see here. Oh, Rupert has a wonderful, wonderful question. What's the most ingenious mark card you've come across?
There was a very recent one that I thought was super clever. It's the 11th hour, which I think there's been a little controversy with the creators and some other things, but that's one that I just backed on Kickstarter and I got my decks. And it's a clock-based system, but not in the most direct way that you would think, you know, where it's like if something is pointing at 2 o'clock, it's a 2, and something very simple, you know, where you would have maybe the minute hand giving you the value and the hour hand giving you the suit in a very sort of easy to decode way. And the system was by Destino, and he just did some really clever things where it's still pretty easy to read. But even if you look at, let's say, the 2 of clubs and the 2 of hearts next to each other, they're not marked in the same way to where you would say, oh, that's a 2 and that's a 2. So I thought that was a really clever approach to a really classic, you know, 100-plus-year-old system that he came up with a new way to encode that to where if someone was suspicious, if you're performing for an audience and they went through, they wouldn't immediately just be like, oh, all these 4s have the clock hand pointing at a 4. So that was really clever. Another one that I really like that I didn't show in the presentation is the Daredevil deck by Henry Evans. It's just printed on Phoenix. And that's intended for more of a parlor or stage type performance where you're very far away from your audience. But the marks on those are like a couple inches tall. They're humongous. And so that I just love the boldness of it. It's not one that I've ever had the guts to perform with since I've always been more of a close-up performer. But when I first saw those, I just like had to crack up laughing at just how gutsy it is. And Henry is a top-notch performer with a lot of road time. So, you know, if he's out there and saying, hey, yeah, I perform shows with this deck, then I fully believe that he has success with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's wonderful. He's wonderful. All right, next question. Daniel Wilson wants to know, as a non-magician, this is a great question for all the non-magicians in the room. Other than the Riffle Test, is there any other way to tell if a deck is marked?
Yeah, the Riffle Test is something that I wanted to have a section on in my talk, but, you know, we just don't have all the time in the world. Because that's something that I've been doing more research into lately, trying to find sort of the origination of the Riffle Test. And so just to speak on that at the moment, I think that certainly, so the original flip books, which I'm going to forget the proper name for it now, was first made around 1860. Sometime in the 1860s. And so I thought that was super interesting that the first ever flip book came out right on the tail end of this huge boom in factory printed marked cards. And so I feel like the Riffle Test may even predate animated flip books that were just used for sort of art and entertainment, because there's no way that people like saw this connection of the size and shape of a deck of cards and the flip book and didn't say like, oh, hey, we can do this. So it's one of these chicken or egg things, which came first. And it's so well known. John Scarney, who is a gambling expert and magician, he was the hand double in The Sting, that Paul Newman movie and whatnot. He's written a lot of great books. And it's often credited as the Scarney Riffle Test, but it certainly predates him by a lot. The earliest printed reference I've been able to find was the open book from the 1930s, where they mentioned the Riffle Test.
Maybe Louis Zangoni? He predated Scarney when it came to gambling. And sure. Zangoni, maybe. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying that he's the guy, but he definitely predated Scarney, and maybe he played with the Riffle Test. And you know what's interesting is the Riffle Test is very similar to the smell test, the sniff test, right? If Courier Stu's in the room, I saw Bayou Matt as well. These guys know how to open a deck of cards and smell it and tell you where the cards are manufactured. And when you see
That's
them doing
wonderful.
it, it looks just like a riffle test. It's very
Oh,
funny,
that's so
very
funny.
funny.
That's awesome. I'm jealous of that. I have no sense of smell, so unlike most people, I don't even get to enjoy that new deck smell when I crack open a new pack.
And Stacy J, all the way from England, she had a very nice comment. It wasn't a question. She just said that there's the Red Fox playing cards right now on Kickstarter has a really
Yes.
nice marking system. I know the Red
Hmm.
Fox playing cards. That's a member of our club. He's a new member. That's Kelly Tenhove. So I saw that he just came in the room. So yeah, if he probably is going to ask you a couple of questions about the markings on decks. But Jason
For sure.
McKinistry has our next question. All the
Jason.
antique makers, who
Hmm.
made the most marked decks? Doherty, NYCC, UPCC, USPCC, Russell Morgan. Who made the most?
That I'm not sure. A lot of the older references I found speak very broadly. So I've seen references to Bartlett in the Sucker's Progress book. He mentions that Bartlett was a big printer of marked cards. Any of the bigger ones that we would know of, like, yeah, Cohen and Doherty and Hart and those, I have not really come across anything major there in terms of factory printing. A lot of the early marked decks you see are steamboats and those type of style, but those are generally not factory marked. Those are usually things where ink has been added or removed. So a lot of those bigger makers, I think, were more reputable. So they weren't doing a lot of the mark cards. I think it was a lot of the smaller, more boutique printers, sort of in the first half of the 1800s, who were doing the printed marked cards, as far as I've been able to find. But again, most of my focus has been sort of in the 20th century of the Magic world, so I'm not like the foremost expert on the antique mark decks.
Great,
And just to go
great.
back and revisit the Riffle Test question, it's certainly one of the quickest and easiest ways. And for me, it's sort of like my give up test. Like if
Can
I've
you show us real quick?
looked
Do
at
you
a
have a deck
card.
in front of you? Can you show us what the
Sure, sure,
riffle
sure.
test looks like?
Yeah, so the Riffle Test, you would just hold the cards by one end and you would riffle down the edge. And so this is my mainframe system for tally hose, but hopefully there's not too much glare or anything. This deck actually holds up fairly well to a Riffle Test.
And so when you riffle,
So
basically what you're looking for are for movements on the
movements,
card.
any changes. So yeah, it works just like animation where it's going frame by frame. And you should hopefully be able to see
Yeah,
things
I see
going.
them
But so
under.
yeah, that's the
Do it again.
Riffle
Do it again.
Test. You
Do it
can
again.
take, yeah, you can take any deck, or that example that I showed with Jackson with his animated VHS tape deck. That's
Right.
basically the Riffle Test.
So if it's just dirt,
Um,
that's not what you're looking for. You're actually looking for uh,
You're
shapes
looking
that
for
move.
changes in design. Yeah, so I would focus on particular specific areas. But yeah, especially if you have an older mark deck that's not necessarily like a reader or whatnot, you can test for sheen differences, that sort of thing. Hold it up to the light and check the angle and see if you see any areas that are a little less shiny or a little more shiny than the rest of the card, and see if you can suss out any patterns. So there are ways other than the riffle tests to
I
sort of
just want to
seek out
say,
marks.
if someone is holding cards and looking at the sheen and the light and studying cards that intently, you are home. You are at the right convention.
Right?
Because we're the only ones that geek out that hard with playing cards. All right, Kevin, this is fantastic. We still have another about 10, 15 minutes to go. I've
Perfect.
got
Let's
more questions in
keep
the
it rolling.
chat. How are you feeling? How did you feel about this?
I feel great. How are you feeling?
I'm loving this, man. How cool is this? We have, let me see here. We have almost 150 people in the room right now, and obviously it's going to go up and down
Awesome.
throughout the day. We're
Sure.
recording everything, so if you miss something, you'll be able to go back and watch it. Obviously, our replay numbers will be way higher than our live numbers. But right now, everyone, go to your socials, share the links, tell everyone that we're live. We're talking to Kevin Reylek about marked cards. And let me go find another question for you. Do you have a white whale deck that you'd like to own? And let me modify the question. Do you have a white whale mark deck that you'd like to own?
Sure. I have a few. One that's realistic for me to hopefully get is a Deland Starback deck. It's not something that's in my collection yet, but I want it to be. So I'm going to talk about that when I have my table spotlight. Things that I don't anticipate I'll get, but I would love to, would be a Deland Wonder deck, the one that Richard Kaufman did the reprint of. So luckily I have the reprint, but with only 6 known examples of the original known to exist, I don't expect that one of those is ever going to come my way. And also being a big fan of the Tally-Ho circlebacks, there is a knockoff design called Excelsior from about 1895. And it is a marked, what looks like Tally-Ho Circleback, but the brand is
Excelsior
Excelsior.
playing card company, right?
Yeah. And one went to auction. Potter and Potter auctioned one off a handful of years ago, and it was far outside my price range. But that's one that, yeah, someday maybe I'll come across one again and can snag that. So yeah, those are a few of my my top white whales.
Okay, Rupert has another excellent question. Since each back is different, is it more expensive to print a marked deck of cards?
Only slightly, and obviously this is going to depend from factory to factory. USPC, they have just their artwork fees, and so depending on if you set things up, if you use their standard faces, you pay a little bit less of an artwork fee than if you use all custom faces. So in terms of that, you might pay a little bit more of an artwork fee, but your standard per deck printing cost with any of the factories should be more or less the same, when you're printing a marked deck.
Excellent answer and great question. If you guys have more questions, please go to the chat room right now. We have about 10-12 more minutes with Kevin for a live Q&A. Make sure you get your questions, and I'm going to try to get to all of them, guys. If I miss them, I apologize. Don't take it personally. Just put your question until I get to it. Okay.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions on production as well, I mean, obviously we're talking about marked cards, but like I said at the beginning of the talk, I've been a card producer for over a decade, so I'm happy to answer questions about that as well. Real
quick, tell everyone your email address.
Kevin Reylek, it's my name, which should be appearing on my image here somewhere. But so yeah, Kevin Reylek, REYLEK @gmail.com. And you can find me on social.
Can we throw, I'm sorry to interrupt you guys. I know you're working really hard behind the scenes. Can you throw his lower thirds up one more time for us so everyone can see? And I'll keep looking for questions in the chat room. Okay, here's a great question from my friend in France, originally from India, Raghava. He wants to know, and he says it might be science fiction, but are there any special marked decks with markings that can only be detected that come with accessories like custom-made lenses or glasses or electronics?
Absolutely. Yep. And again, this isn't 100% my area of expertise, but there are definitely decks that have what you would call like juice or daub or these sorts of things. And some of those methods can be seen with the naked eye, but there are versions of invisible inks that can only be read through either special glasses or special contact lenses, or through special camera equipment. Yeah, where you would have people in another room watching a video feed on a monitor with a hidden camera, and through that camera feed, you can see all the marks on the back of the card plain as day, but to the naked eye, it's absolutely invisible.
It's like
so yeah,
those
are out there. Yeah, it's like James Bond,
right?
100%. Yep.
Wasn't that some opening scene where he was playing Goldfinger and they were using some aristocrat decks? I was just handed the Ian Fleming book, but it doesn't have the aristocrat cards on the cover.
There you go.
Thank you. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you had the whole thing at the beginning of Goldfinger, but that was super low tech. That was just Goldfinger's girlfriend looking through binoculars over his shoulder. But hey, whatever works,
Hey, man, I was just saying, it feels like James Bond when you start using stuff like that.
Totally.
Okay, so you were very close to Alex Pandrea, House of Playing Cards. Can you tell us a little bit about the knock suit marks?
Yeah, so the knock suit marks, the idea of using a corner mark. So the knock suit marks go by the corners. As we know, the knocks are just a solid wall of color. It's just a rectangle of black or red or whatever the color may be. And so we used a method of rounding and pointing the corners. So if it had one pointed corner, it was a spade. If it had two pointed corners, it was a heart. 3 is clubs and 4 is diamonds. And so it was very easy to look at that and say, oh, I see 2 pointed and 2 round corners, that's a heart. And so we did that starting with the V2 knocks. The very first V1 knocks from 2012 are unmarked. And then V2 onward had the suit marking system. The ones that were fully marked, the first ones were the Pandrea signature series. And there have been some other additional knocks after that that have also been fully marked for suit and value. But Alex says, I think it's a freely downloadable video. He has a really great routine that uses combinations of forcing a card, making someone pick the card that you want them to, as well as reading marks from freely selected cards that create really powerful magic moments. So yeah, even if you have a deck that's not fully marked on all 52 cards for suit and value, just having the cards marked for suit can be really useful as a performer. And historically, you see that as well a lot. There were a lot of those older gambling mark systems where they would only mark the high cards and they wouldn't mark them for suit. They would just mark the value of like the tens and the core cards, because that alone in a game gives you a tremendous advantage, even though you don't necessarily know all the specific information.
And it seems like more than just ink, like you can have different kinds of markings and they don't have to be ink, which is very interesting.
For sure. Yep. Yeah, there's tactile marking systems where you would just feel with your thumb. There are blisters. Owen O'Hare, he's a craftsman in Ireland. He's a magician and a mad genius, the equipment that he comes up with. And he has several different versions of punches. So like where you make just a little tiny blister in the card that you can feel tactily. And I know Don Boyer has combined a lot of methods. He has his blind wizard deck. I know Don's in the chat here. And I don't know how Don sits and makes all of these, because I'm sure he'll put in the chat however many marks are on that blind wizard deck, but it's an insane amount. Whereas historically, usually, yeah, you would just maybe put a blister on the back of all the aces, let's say. And then by having that tactile feel, you could have the deck legitimately shuffled, and you could do a dealing demonstration where you deal yourself all 4 aces, and that would be with a combination of feeling that blister and then doing second deals. So as soon as you feel that blister, then you know you have to deal seconds until you hit the position where you want that marked ace to go.
Seems like we're moving into a magic territory. Not everyone in the room is a magician. I can see the magicians starting to get a little uncomfortable,
sure.
shifting in their seats like, oh, Kevin, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that.
I don't think I'm revealing anything too major that's not
you're fine.
out there in a lot of sources.
No confidences will be betrayed today. Okay, we're having a little discussion in the chat right now about the worst mark deck out there. And right now, people are pretty much unanimous. They're saying that it's the Kittens deck that is the worst mark deck.
I mean, people are entitled to their opinion. Yeah, Kittens for me, I love the concept. When I saw them, I thought it was hilarious, and I bought both versions. I have the pink and the blue. The blue has a much different and much better, in my opinion, system than the original pink Kittens. But yeah, unfortunately, those pink Kittens were one of the ones that had just such tiny, tiny marks. And it took me, I got them, some friends of mine who had been at a Penguin Expo had told me, they were like, yeah, we had these kittens. They're like, and we looked at them and we couldn't find the marks. They were like, we were looking at these for 10, 15 minutes and couldn't find them. And I was going over those cards for a good 10 minutes before I finally found the marks. They are tiny. So yeah, for me, they're not the most useful thing as a performer, but I love that sort of thing as a collector. So as a mark deck enthusiast, I'm glad that I have the kittens in my collection, but yeah, they wouldn't be my choice to go perform at a gig.
Of course. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have like Lautrec Silk series.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the Silk. I didn't know that they were marked.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing in the room here. They can be read at a certain way when the light hits them in a right way, which is interesting.
Sure. And I see this. I see that Ted's, so he says that so not necessarily that the Silk are marked, but that it would be great if there were a system using that sort of technology.
I see. My apologies.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to read questions and they're flying past, and I'm trying to keep it. So I quickly read it.
That can be the difficult thing, because some decks come out and they're very clearly advertised as being marked, and others aren't. There are plenty of decks that come out that are secretly marked, and unless you look for it, or unless sort of word comes to you through the grapevine, you may be sitting on decks that are marked that you have no idea because it wasn't an advertised feature.
That was my next question. There's a really great question. Have you ever had a deck of cards in your collection that you didn't know was marked, and then after a while you found out it was marked?
Yes, the Dapper deck from Vanishing Ink. That was one that I don't believe that they had advertised as being marked, but I like Josh and Andy, and it was a fun looking deck, and so I picked one up at one point, and then I was going through it, and I was like, wait a second, these are marked. And a little shout out to them. I think they are the only deck, the only one I've ever seen, where most decks would mark the 10 with either an actual numeral 10, a letter X, or just a 0. I believe they mark it with a letter T, which I don't think I've seen anywhere else. So credit to them for doing something unique.
Yes. Larry Harold has just chimed in and said the original Casino Royale had Orson Welles using infrared glasses to read a marked deck.
Awesome. So cool.
See, I'm telling you, it's very James Bond-like. It's very James Bond-like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know there was
the
a French magician named Gerard Majax who wrote a book about cheating techniques, and he had a section in there about high-tech cheating. And, you know, how real it was, that's up for you guys to decide. But it's there if you want to go look at it. I know that it's obviously in French, but they also have an English edition as well. Sure. Okay, we only have a few more. We have time for basically 1 or 2 more questions. So let's, if you're going to get your questions in, get them in now. Let's see here. Don Boye just found out that Ask Alexander cards were marked.
Well, they're not marked. They're able to be marked. Alexander has this sort of swirl in there that lets you apply that Baker system, but they are not marked out of the box. And I see in the chat that Wally says that the Dapper deck was marketed as marked. I guess I just missed that. I missed the campaign itself, and I picked them up after the fact, and I guess just never saw the ad copies. So it was unknown to me that they were marked until I had them in my hand and I was going through them, and it was like, oh, wait a minute, these are marked. So clear that up.
Okay. Okay. Any other? Let's see if we have. Someone's asking me if, sorry, not someone. The Steve Brooks is asking me if the rain mainly falls on the plain in Spain. Yes. Yes, it does.
Of course it does.
Okay.
We could have.
You have a favorite movie. Ben wants to know, do you have a favorite movie involving gambling, cheating, mark cards, and why is your answer Shade?
I actually really like Shade a lot. And yeah, there's so many cool cheating things in there. And yeah, Paul Wilson, I think, was the main consultant on that, but I'm sure that was a team. So that one's really fun for, yeah, people who are enthusiasts of cards in general or Magic, and all the little references they have. You know, they have characters named Vernon and the Professor and things like this.
That's right. And
Daniel, you mispronounced the Sting. Yeah, the Sting is phenomenal. There are so many, and Casino Royale, the new one, the Daniel Craig one, is also awesome, which really doesn't involve a lot of like marked cards or cheating, but you know, there's games, there's scenes where they're playing cards. So
that's right.
Yeah, those would be a few. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we have about 30 seconds, 60 seconds out. So I would rather spend that time thanking you and letting you bask in the glory and love of the chat room. Throw this man some ones. Kevin, thank you so much for your time putting together this incredible educational talk about marked cards. We couldn't have asked for a better person to cover the topic. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Lee, and thank you everyone for watching and participating in the chat. And yeah, hopefully we can just keep the conversation going later. Like I said, you know, it's not an empty thing for me when I say, here's my email, get in touch and talk to me about marked cards, because I would be thrilled if I checked my inbox and had people being like, hey, did you ever see this old vintage marked deck or anything like that? So please do get in touch with me.
Awesome. All right, Kevin, thank you so much. Again, throw that man some ones, show him some love.
Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to the rest of the convention.
We're all applauding for you back here. You can hear us applauding. Okay, it's 1:30.